Okay, so we will go ahead and get going. I do want to take the time to say thank you for joining us today. This is session two of our revised STAAR alternate to participation requirements. This is the same session that we completed yesterday. So if you have already been in attendance, you will see the same materials. However, we just wanted to give different options in order for people to come and hear the slide presentation or the materials that were being presented at a couple different times based upon flexibility of their schedules. So we do appreciate you being here. We appreciate the time that we get to spend together. If we have not met, my name is Andrew Lauber. I'm the Director of Test Administration in the Student Assessment Division here at TEA. And today I will have a co-presenter with us from our Special Populations Division. And I want to call out that we are super excited and happy that we are able to work together in collaboration with our Special Populations Division to make sure that we are providing you with the most accurate information and up-to-date information as it relates to STAAR Alternate 2. So right now I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Casey Jones, just to give a quick introduction.
Hi, my name is Casey Jones, and I'm the Complex Needs Coordinator on our Technical Assistance team at the agency. And I've worked hand in hand with assessment in revising these participation requirements for the state and for our students. And we've taken this before many stakeholders. You guys will see that later in the presentation. And hopefully today will help clear up any confusion, any questions that you have. We're going to have some embedded frequently asked questions in here. And then we'll also have some questions there at the end that have been asked across the state that hopefully will help you guys.
Thanks, Casey. So from the very beginning, I do want to point out a couple of things. We are continuing to make sure that this PowerPoint is accessible for all. So we are working on this PowerPoint to make sure that it's accessible for posting. We're hoping to have that done by the end of next week so that you can have the material, so then you can turn it around and present to your own LEAs, present to regions. So know that we are currently working on that to make sure that we have that accurate information. One of the reasons why we do that is to make sure that everything inside the PowerPoint is accurate. In our presentation yesterday, we actually found that 2 slides were not in the correct position. So we have updated those slides, and that's part of the reason why we want to make sure that we have one last look over before we produce it for you guys. So you will be having this. This will be delivered to you next week so that you can have the accurate information. We will also let regional people know when this is posted so that you can hear it from them that this is posted and you can go and find this information. Like I said, we have worked collaboratively with our Special Populations Division, and again, we are thankful for their help and support during this. There will be times that we will jump in, kind of interject as it sees fit for the different specialties that we all have. But this is the revised STAAR Alternate 2 participation requirements. This is the same presentation that we had yesterday, just a reminder as we go through. So I wanted to make sure that we set up some norms first. So just make sure that you have your microphones muted during this time. If you are an attendee, you will not have that option, but our panelists, please make sure that your microphones are muted. And we have enabled the Q&A function for this particular webinar. We want to hear your questions. We want to know what your questions are. And the reason being is we are currently producing an FAQ document. We want to make sure that we capture your questions so that we can then accurately produce that Q&A or the FAQ, and then it can be sent back out to the field. Part of the reason to do 2 webinars is to capture the most questions that we can so that we can make sure that we are giving you the most accurate information. So please make sure to use that Q&A function. I cannot guarantee that you will have your questions answered today, but what I can guarantee you is that when those questions are delivered to us, they have an email address attached. So we can reach out to you if you have additional questions. And if at any time that you have questions after the Q&A is closed, please reach out to the Student Assessment Help Desk so that we can help answer any of those questions that you may have as it relates to STAAR Alternate 2. So our agenda, what we're looking at, what we want to accomplish today. So we're going to look at the STAAR Alternate 2 overview. This is just from beginning to end, ARD committee making decisions for students to the assessment. We won't get into the actual nuts and bolts of the assessment. That's a different webinar, but we want to go over the overview of the entire program. We'll take a look at the U.S. Department of Education's 1% waiver denial. This is a letter that was sent to us in March of this year, and we want to make sure that we give you accurate information regarding that. We'll look at the STAAR Alternate 2 participation requirements. We're actually going to go line by line on each of those participation lines so that we can address questions that have already come up, and then give the ARD committees additional questions to think about as they're reviewing those participation requirements. So while there's not a handout for this presentation today, and while you don't have the slide deck, if you don't have, now would be a good time to make a copy or print out a copy of the participation requirements so you can capture your own notes. Again, we will be producing a FAQ document and this PowerPoint for you, but just something, a tip if you wanted to grab those now. Then we have a list of frequently asked questions that have already been sent to the agency. So we want to look at some of those questions, review them with you, and then so that you can take some of that information back. And then we'll go over some of the additional resources that have been produced that are currently in development and what you can continue to expect from the agency as we move forward. So goals, we'll provide an overview of the STAAR Alternate 2 assessment. We want to make sure that there is an accurate understanding of the U.S. Department of Education's statewide waiver denial of the 1% for our students that are assessed in an alternate assessment. And then we want to make sure that we are able to give you the most accurate information that we can in regards to the participation requirements as we move line by line. So a quick overview of STAAR Alternate 2. To address what STAAR Alternate 2 is an academic assessment based upon students that are accessing grade level curriculum through prerequisite skills. So students that are taking STAAR Alternate 2 are accessing grade level curriculum through those prerequisite skills, which are identified for the student through all the data collection that is done in ARD meetings, and through different data collection processes. We'll go through some of the data collection pieces, things that can be used in making determinations for STAAR Alternate 2. We'll look at those a little bit later in this presentation. Another thing that STAAR Alternate 2 is designed for is it is designed for our students that have the most significant cognitive disability. Throughout the presentation today, you'll hear us talk about the students with the most significant. We want to make sure that we highlight this particular verbiage because this is the verbiage that comes from federal guidelines. Federal guidelines require that a student that is participating in an alternate assessment, that they qualify with the most significant cognitive disability. And then STAAR Alternate 2 is developed based upon the Every Student Succeed Act and also the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So in looking at those two pieces of legislature, we're able to come up and develop the STAAR Alternate 2 program, the assessment, and the participation requirements for students that are participating. So who is assessed with STAAR Alternate 2? So STAAR Alternate 2 follows the same guidelines that we have for our STAAR test. Students in grades 3 through 8, if they qualify or meet the participation requirements that are determined by the ARD meeting, they are able to participate in STAAR Alternate 2. So the ARD committee looks at the participation requirements and determines if the student has the most significant cognitive disability. And if it's determined yes, then the student is to participate in STAAR Alternate 2. In grades 3 through 8, for the appropriate tests, these follow what the STAAR looks like. So math and reading in all subjects. 5th grade will include science. 8th grade, science and social studies. And then for our students that are in high school, this follows what our end of course exams look like. Algebra 1, English 2, U.S. history and biology. So students whose ARD committee makes the determination that they meet the participation requirements for Alternate 2 will participate in STAAR Alternate 2 in those particular areas. Again, you'll hear throughout the entire presentation today that it's an ARD committee decision. So the ARD committee looks at participation requirements and then makes eligibility determinations from there. So let's talk about the most significant. You heard me talk about most significant cognitive disability a little bit earlier. So what is the definition? So the most significant cognitive disability, or a student who has a most significant cognitive disability, exhibits significant intellectual and adaptive behavior deficits in their ability to plan, to comprehend, and to reason. And they also have adaptive behavior deficits that limit their ability to apply social and practical skills. And these are examples that you will see in the old participation requirements and also in the new participation requirements. And these examples listed are personal care things, social problem solving skills like dressing or feeding, eating, using money. And these deficits are across all life domains. I do want to point out here that these are examples. The examples used are not meant to be an exhaustive list. These are just examples to help the ARD committee go back and review the student and how the student is accessing curriculum, how the student is accessing self-care skills, things like that. This is not a full list of examples or full list of items that should be looked at. The ARD committee should look at the student as a whole and see where the student is at in all of these areas, and then make a determination if they meet qualifications for the participation requirements. As we go line by line, you'll hear us say, well, there's examples here, but remember to look at the student as a whole. These are only examples, it's not an all-inclusive list. And then to continue with our definition of a student with the most significant cognitive disability, they do require extensive, direct, individualized instruction, and they need substantial supports that are neither temporary nor specific to a particular content area. So as we move through the participation requirements, I would highlight this in all rows, that we would remember this particular part of the definition, that they require extensive, direct, individualized instruction as we continue to look through the participation requirements. So let's talk about the U.S. Department of Education's statewide 1% denial letter. On March 9th of this year, the USDE sent TEA this letter stating that they were denying our request for the statewide 1% waiver because Texas did not demonstrate progress in reducing the number of students that participate in an alternate assessment. Federal requirements state that all states are to test less than 1% or 1% of the student population with an alternate assessment. If we project that we are going to be over that number, we are allowed to complete a waiver. Our waiver was rejected based upon our participation numbers that we can see for 2022 below. As you can tell, we are testing about 1.5% for mathematics, 1.4 for reading or RLA, and then 1.3 for science. This was our 2022 numbers, and as we look at 2023 numbers, we do not see a significant change. Actually, we see us increasing a little bit. So this caused us to have some action, to take some next steps. But I want to point out that we are not alone in this denial. Texas is not alone. There were 14 other states that had their waiver denied as well. And this was a combination of things. They were testing above 1%. They could have just tested above 1%, or they were testing above 1% and didn't meet the 95% testing threshold that is also in legislation. So as you can see from the dark blue states that are listed here, we are not alone in our waiver denial. Now, there were 8 states that saw their waiver approved by the USDE for making significant progress towards reaching their 1% state limit. The other states highlighted here, we're still investigating, still making sure exactly what happened. It's a combination that they are already at 1% and below. So we are not alone in this. I do want to make sure that that's highlighted. So just a quick question as we move forward, we want to make sure that there's an understanding here about the 1%. So does the 1% cap apply to individual districts and or campuses? And the answer is no. The 1% cap is a state level cap. So we produce the documentation for the USDE that says we are over our 1% statewide. Now, I want to be very clear that we understand that there will be certain districts and campuses that will be over 1% because of their specific student population or because of size. Some districts, we understand that 2 students may set you over that 1% threshold. I want to be very clear that our goal throughout all of this is not to get to 1%. Our goal is to provide clarifying language. Our goal is to make sure that it's clear that we how we determine what students are assessed, that we are making accurate decisions for students. And so we want to make sure that we provide that information to you. So again, the goal is not necessarily to get to 1%. The goal is to make sure that we identify the appropriate students for the appropriate assessments. So kind of when and who and why and what have we done so far? So beginning in May of this year, we announced to the field that we were updating the STAAR Alternate 2 participation requirements based upon the feedback that we received from the waiver denial from the U.S. Department of Education. So we are starting to update. This is where we began our work with our Special Populations Division to ensure that our participation requirements, the revised participation requirements, were still accurate, that they were still identifying students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And so this is where we teamed up with our friends like Casey Jones and other people in the Special Populations Division. So we provided them with a draft, and then that draft then went on to other special education educators and administrators to provide us with feedback. It also went to ESC administrators and specialists. We also sent the preliminary document to education advocates so that we can make sure that we had stakeholder feedback on these participation requirements. And many of you were part of that. And then, like I mentioned, we did work closely with the Special Populations Division to ensure that the participation requirements met the definition of a most significant cognitive disability. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we clarify the scope of students that are assessed with STAAR Alternate 2, make sure we clarify what that scope is, and also that we continue to meet our ESSA requirements. Again, I do want to reiterate that the goal is not to get to 1%. The goal is to ensure that we clarify the scope of students and that we are providing participation requirements that identify the students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And so that kind of leads us to where we are now. It led us to our new participation requirements as we continue to talk about that. I'm going to let Casey jump in and add a few comments here. You're on mute, Casey.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Just as a reminder, the alternate assessment is for students with the most significant cognitive disability. The term "the most" is federal language, and so unfortunately we can't get away from it. And there's also not a quantifier of what the word "most" means. And so as a state within the participation requirements, we've helped ARD committees try to arrive at that decision by some of the rows that you guys will be seeing through the participation requirements. And so I want to keep in mind that this assessment is for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So we're very well aware that there are going to be students who have significant cognitive disabilities who are not eligible to take the alternate assessment. And we're going to talk about what that looks like for programming and other things like that later on in the presentation. But just keep that in mind as we move forward, that this alternate assessment is for students with the most significant cognitive disability. It's just a very small sliver of students.
Thanks, Casey. So as you have seen, and as we know, let's be honest, we know that you've seen it because you continue to ask questions, and which is what we want to help address. So these are our new participation requirements, a 3-page document that outlines how to identify students with most significant cognitive disabilities. And up at the very beginning, we look at our background and instructions. And I want to make sure that we clarify that any of these decisions cannot be made outside of ARD. This is an ARD committee decision. The ARD is responsible for reviewing the data that is associated with these students. The ARD is responsible for coming up and looking at the participation requirements to make determinations. So it's also a responsibility of the ARD meeting to know all assessment options, what STAAR looks like, what STAAR Alternate 2 looks like, also to know what the accommodations look like, and that the members of the ARD committee are trained and they know what those accommodations and things look like. So as we start looking at the background and instructions, we move on to that second paragraph. And the ARD committee is making the eligibility determinations for STAAR alternate 2. They're looking at the students' IEPs. They're making sure that documentation is in the IEP. And also they can look at the PLAF, the student present level of academic achievement and functional performance, that they're looking at these items in making the determinations. Now, we want to be very clear on the data that can be collected. I mentioned this earlier. What data needs to be collected, or what data can we look at? Well, look at the student as a whole. Look at the FIE. Look at the full individual evaluation of the student. Look at the student if they've had in-home training assessments. Look at the student if the parent is providing documentation. Some of this you will look at and say, well, they can do it at school, but what does the parent say? Make sure that you're taking their voice into consideration when you're going through and looking at the participation requirements and collecting that data, making sure that it is part of the ARD meeting documents, that it's documented there as well. A couple weeks ago, we also released a companion document. This companion document walks through the participation requirements and helps identify other data collection pieces that ARD committees can use. On the second page of that companion document, down towards the bottom, there's additional ideas for you to use. Again, we provide examples, but those examples are not necessarily the exhaustive list of items to look at. Look at the student as a whole. Look at the student and see where you can collect data for that, and making sure that you're collecting data from all members of the ARD committee that are making determinations for our students. In part of our conversation about the most significant cognitive disabilities, we had to really look at eligibility codes. We had to look about students with specific learning disabilities and students with a speech impairment only. And the first two questions on the participation document really address students with specific learning disabilities and SI. And based upon the definition of these two eligibility criteria in isolation do not qualify as a student with the most significant cognitive disability. Now, that doesn't mean that multiple SI or SLD can be associated with other eligibility codes, and then the student can have a most significant cognitive disability. But in isolation, a student with specific learning disability and SI do not meet the criteria for the most significant cognitive disability. And because of that, the student is not eligible to take STAAR Alternate 2 based upon the federal definitions of most significant cognitive disabilities. So moving forward, after we go through the background information, we go through those first two questions, Then we come to our list of columns and questions and lines to look at. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to go through each one of these lines line by line so that we can make sure that we have an additional question that you can ask or additional considerations as you think about it. I do want to pause here because I want to make sure that we understand that there's a clarifying difference or an idea to think about. When you look at column 1, we're really looking at students independently accessing the materials or accessing the tasks that are doing this. The student is in charge. The student is initiating. The student is completing the tasks independently. There may be an adult that says, remember reminding them to go and complete this step, but it's the student initiation. And then in column 2, we're looking at a more intense or adult interaction. The adult is initiating. The adult is helping to the student to perform. The adult is adding modifications to curriculum and things like that. So as you look at that, look at column 1, look at column 2, and make the differentiation if it's a student-led or if we're looking at an adult-led document. So going row by row, we want to make sure that we address those columns like I mentioned. So in column 1 or in our first row, we really need to ask the question, does the student access all enrolled grade level TEKS through prerequisite skills? This includes math, reading, language arts, science, social studies, and other TEK-based courses. What we've also heard is, what about electives? Things like that. Well, is the student still accessing the course through the prerequisite skills? This is where the ARD committee will need to make a decision and a determination on what the student is, how the student is accessing that grade level TEK. Row 2, we're looking at traditional methods or assessment methods. Is this a multiple choice test? Is it a short answer? Is it an essay? What is being provided to the student? Can the student access this traditional assessment method with the use of accommodations? Maybe it's an essay. Maybe they need a technical or a assistive technology device in order to add their essay in. If the student is able to perform that and we gave them access to that task through assistive technology, those things need to be considered. But then when we look at column 2, looking at non-traditional methods of assessment, is information being isolated for the student? Maybe the student answered the question incorrectly from the first time, and then we make a modification. We isolated additional information. Maybe they're pointing to or reaching out. But again, we need the ARD committee can look at, should ask the question, does the student routinely require alternate or non-traditional methods of assessment? Looking at row 3, how significant are the needs of the student in order to access the academic areas? Is the student need specific needs in order to go into the classroom, to go in and access those prerequisite skills or the grade level curriculum? So how significant are the students' needs in relation to how they impact access and progress in the academic area, which affect the student's level of independence? So again, the ARD committee taking back, looking at this particular example, making a determination based upon feedback from the ARD committee members and seeing how significant those needs are. Again, they're making the determination as to what that looks like. I do want to pause here. This is where our slides got mixed up. I just want to point out that to those of you that may be watching later, that this is where this particular mess up was. So row 4, we're looking at functional goals. I want to point out that any student can have a functional goal. This could be a social skills goal. This could be a self-advocacy goal. Any student with an IEP can have this goal. But the ARD committee needs to look at the functional goals, and does the functional goal help that student access or be able to function independently? Looking at the personal care and hygiene, is it implemented across all settings to support the student to gain that independence? and looking at that adult assistant. Is it ongoing? Does the teacher, does the teaching assistant, does the parent have to continually provide assistance to help make those functional goals happen? Row 5, we talk about how extensive is the support required for the student to function safely in the school. We know that some students can function safely or they can transition, but looking about how extensive is that support? Is there pre-teaching that goes into every transition? How is there ongoing need or individualized support for the student as they're making those transitions to function safely? Can they transition, or do those skills translate into daily living? Is it across all instructional areas and daily life? So looking at how extensive is the support required for that student to function safely in daily life and participate in academic instruction across all settings. And then row 6, this one, I'll be honest, has elicited a lot of questions. So we want to make sure that we highlight this one particularly. And I'm going to go back to one of my original statements to say any of the examples that are listed are just examples and not an exhaustive list. So as you're looking at self-care, make sure that you're looking at the student as a whole. Maybe the student needs continual ongoing instruction on how to brush their teeth. Maybe as it gets cooler and cooler in Texas, it's never going to be cold, except for in February, right? But as it gets cooler and cooler, is the student able to make appropriate clothing decisions without adult assistance? Is the student able to transition safely in the hallway? Things like that. So the ARD committee asking the question, how extensive and frequent is the adult support required for the student to initiate, to perform, and complete the self-care routines? Casey, I'm going to let you have this one.
Thanks. As Andrew said, this is definitely a popular question across the state. We get questions daily that says, my student can blank independently, and you can fill in that blank. They can toilet independently, they can feed themselves independently, they can dress themselves, they can go to lunch independently, all of those different routines. Can they still participate in STAAR Alternate 2? And so it's really important to look at what that independence looks like for the student. I think a lot of times as teachers, we don't always give ourselves credit for the level of support that we're providing students so that they can initiate, perform, and complete the self-care routine. And so think about students in those self-care routines. Again, not an exhaustive list, but are you reminding them to use the restroom? Are they on a toileting schedule? Is there a task analysis in the restroom so that they know the steps to using the restroom, washing their hands? Are you escorting them to lunch? Do you need to help them make appropriate lunch decisions? Are you helping opening packages in the lunchroom? Do you need to take them to and from the bus? All of those things that we're providing students that support, we need to stop and ask ourselves, are they truly doing this independently? Or are we still providing a level of assistance that if we weren't there, we're not really sure what would happen? Would the student remain in the bathroom for 20 minutes? Would they just stand in the lunch line and not pick anything out or not pick healthy items out? Would they get lost going to the bus? All of those things. And so you can see some of those ongoing supports there on the left, those visual, verbal, physical prompts, cueing, visual timer or visual schedules, timers, that adult transition support, any physical support that we may need to be providing students, such as helping them get dressed, helping them pull up their pants, task analysis. So think about all of those things, because we've gotten a lot of questions that my student can do this. And when we really dig down deep, there is still truly a really heavy level of adult assistance. So hopefully this will help clear things up for you guys. Again, not an exhaustive list. And so there may be students that have one or two of these that they can do independently, but there's still several other self-care routines that we're really heavily involved with them and may be eligible to take the alternate assessment.
Perfect. Thanks, Casey. Okay, moving on, row 7. So we get to look about those daily routines that Casey just mentioned. How extensive and frequent is the adult support required for those students to follow those directions? Maybe, like Casey mentioned, the students on a visual schedule. Who's in charge of the visual schedule? Is the adult still making the schedule for the student? Things to ask as you go through: what is the support of the adult as they continue to show the student's independence? And then row 8, about communication skills. How extensive and frequent are the individual supports required for the student to participate in on-topic or age-appropriate academic and social exchange? What do the conversations look like? Are the conversations only known to one particular adult, or are they able to transfer across multiple adults? Will multiple adults understand what the student is trying to communicate? So really looking in and diving into what that student's individual communication style is. Do they continue to need that support from an adult to help make sure that their needs, wants are communicated effectively? So after we go through those lines, then, as we have mentioned before, the ARD committee makes the determination if the student met criteria for a most significant cognitive disability. Here we mark if the student had all criteria marked in column 2, which is in line with a most significant cognitive disability. So the ARD committee is making those determinations. And I do want to highlight what's in the red box. I mentioned it earlier as we were talking about the most significant cognitive disability and having part of that definition in our minds as we continue to think and look at these students. So remember, a student with the most significant cognitive disability requires those extensive, direct, individualized instruction, as well as a need for substantial supports that are neither temporary nor specific to a particular content area. So making sure as you go through that you have that in your mind. And then based on the response to question 3, then the ARD committee can move on or stop. So as you move on, we do require that we provide assurances to confirm that we're not making significant or our STAAR alternate 2 decisions based upon a student being economically disadvantaged, that we're not making determinations for a student participating in STAAR alternate 2 just because of an emergent bilingual status or any at-risk coding. And we're not making those determinations because of accountability rates, things like that. So we ask the ARD committee to provide those assurances and to confirm that those statements that are listed are accurate. One of the questions that we also received is about the rationale box. What information needs to be put in a rationale box? We have a majority of this information inside of our IEPs. It's located in the FIE, in the PLAF, things like that. What we ask you to do is to make sure that your rationale includes a statement as to why the student cannot participate in STAAR. If you need to make reference to CIEP or CFIE, perfectly acceptable. The expectation is that you do not go line by line and identify areas based upon those lines in the participation requirements. Please make sure that there is a statement that says why the student can't access. And if you need to refer back to the IEP documents, please make sure to do so. And then we have a summary. We're looking about what the student is going to take. We talked about eligibility requirements at the very beginning in our overview section about grades 3-8, what they are to take, and about course coding for students in high school. These are listed here. If a student is participating in an EOC STAAR alternate 2, make sure that the course coding matches for that student. We'll talk about programming in just a few minutes and through the FAQ document about students that no longer qualify and what that means for course coding and things like that. So let's go through some frequently asked questions. Casey, like you did yesterday, I'm going to need you to take the lead on some of these.
Yep, that's fine. I got this one. Another really popular question across the state is my student no longer meets eligibility for the alternate assessment. Will his or her special education programming need to change? Specifically, the question is a lot of times, can my student still remain in life skills, right? And so ultimately, this is an ARD committee decision as to what the programming looks like for students. And so the ARD committee is responsible for educating the student in the least restrictive environment possible, while still addressing the students' needs and critical skill areas, so those goals and objectives. And so a student may have a significant cognitive disability, but may not meet eligibility requirements for taking the alternate assessment. And so nothing may change about their programming. Again, an ARD committee decision, but just want to be very clear that if a student doesn't meet the requirements for the alternate assessment, that doesn't mean that their day-to-day programming, supports, and services needs to change. Unfortunately, the agency is not able to comment on the frequency, duration, and location of individual students' special education supports and services because we are not the ARD committee. We don't have all the facts for your student. We don't know the student like you do. And so that is ultimately an ARD committee decision. So just want to be very clear that we are aware that students will still have significant cognitive disabilities and may not be eligible to take the alternate assessment. And that doesn't mean that we need to upend their programming. Their programming may remain exactly as it always has been for that student or as it was for last year. Another thing I want to point out is we've had a few questions of we feel like the student needs to have a one-to-one to be able to be eligible for the alternate assessment. And that is absolutely not true. There is nowhere in their requirements about any sort of staffing ratios or decisions, and staffing considerations, again, are an ARD committee decision.
Perfect. Casey, I think this one's you too.
Yep, I got this one. Okay, so my student no longer meets eligibility for STAAR Alternate 2. Can he or she still receive instruction at the prerequisite or modified level? I think there's been some questions in chat today that my student can do all those self-help skills that you guys were talking about. They can dress themselves and, you know, bebop around the hallway by themselves, and they can go to lunch and all of the good things, right? But they're still accessing at the prerequisite level. And so, yes, students can still access enrolled grade level TEKS through modifications or prerequisites. That's, again, an ARD committee decision. You guys have all the data for that. But just because the student isn't taking the alternate assessment doesn't mean that we still aren't addressing their needs where they are. It's also important to note that only students who meet the participation requirements and will take the alternate assessment can be associated with the alternate course codes and PEIMS. And you guys can see those courses there, the Algebra 1, English 2, Biology, and US History.
Thanks. So this question is regarding a student that has always qualified for STAAR Alternate 2. And then based upon the revised participation requirements, they do not meet eligibility requirements and are now going to take STAAR. And they end up not passing or meeting the approaches grade level. And so the question is about accelerated instruction. And this is very clear in statute that in House Bill 1416, that if a student does not meet approaches grade level, that they will participate in accelerated instruction. 1416 also allowed some students or parents to elect to modify or remove those requirements. Again, these are things that can be addressed in ARD so that the parent can have those decision-making abilities. So make sure to look at those, and the parents are aware of their options there. And additionally, the ARD may be convened if the committee feels that the student's IEP needs to be modified based upon those accelerated instruction requirements. Oops, I think I skipped one. Nope, good. My apologies. Does the ARD committee have to meet again if the committee has already reviewed and determined participation for the 23-24 school year using the previous STAAR Alternate 2 participation requirements? The answer to this one is it depends. So ARD committees must review and determine student participation in STAAR and STAAR Alternate 2 for each school year. If the ARD committee has already reviewed and made the determination for 23-24 based upon the student's previous participation requirements, they're still required to review all eligible students and make those determinations. Now, if there is a change, those changes can be made through an ARD amendment or in a full ARD meeting. And then moving forward on a go forward basis, all student participation or assessment participation decisions, specifically with STAAR Alternate 2, do need to be made using the STAAR Alternate 2 participation requirements. Next question. So my student meets the participation requirements for STAR Alternate 2 in some areas, but not all. Is he or she still required to take STAR? Yes, and as we made mention in the definitions, as we looked at most significant cognitive disability, a student with a most significant cognitive disability will qualify in all sections. And as we noted for STAR Alternate 2, it is an assessment that's designed specifically for students that meet the criteria of a most significant cognitive disability. So yes, students have to meet all eligible or mark column 2 in the participation requirements for all rows in order to participate in STAR Alternate 2. Next one is that I have only ever given STAR Alternate 2. This is from a teacher perspective. But now I have a student who needs to take STAR. Do I need to be trained in administering both assessments? And the answer is yes. If you're administering both types of assessments, you will need to be trained in test security for both administrations and also the administration procedures specific to those of the assessment that you're giving. That includes if you're doing both STAR Alternate 2 and STAR, you will need to be trained in both. And then knowing the accommodations, what the student is eligible for, what can and cannot be done through the accommodation resources. Next frequently asked question is, my student is eligible for special education services based on only a speech impairment, but meets all other requirements in step 2. Can he or she take STAR Alternate 2? Again, we addressed this one a little bit, but I want to make sure that it's very clear. The answer to this question is no. This is designed for students with the most significant cognitive disability. And based upon federal definitions, these students with a speech impairment or a specific learning disability do not meet the definition for a most significant cognitive disability. That doesn't mean that the ARD committee cannot go back and revise and look at adding additional eligibility if the student is eligible for those. So no, if a student is only SI or SID, they are not eligible to take STAR Alternate 2 based upon the definitions. So that's the end of the frequently asked questions. Now, as I go through the next section, I want to make sure that it's very clear to continue to add your questions into the Q&A function. As I mentioned earlier, I know that you will probably not get an answer to your question today, but we are making sure that we're working towards adding and compiling all FAQ questions to have released to you very soon. We want to make sure that you have that information. So as we're going through the next additional resources, I want to make sure that know that we're coming close to the end of the presentation, that you get these in so that we can make sure to address them. So what steps have we done now? What additional resources will there be? What additional resources can we use in order to make sure that we continue to make decisions in finding the appropriate students to participate in STAR Alternate 2? So you know that the participation requirements have been released. This training will be posted, as well as you will have the PowerPoint presentation for you to utilize. We also produced the companion document. It's on the STAR Alternate 2 website. You're more than welcome to go and pull, and highly recommend using that document as you're making determination decisions in the ARC committee. We've added some additional language to some of the categories. For self-care, there's additional language that mirrors or mimics what we said today. So please make sure that you're utilizing that particular document as you're moving forward. We will be producing the FAQ document, like I mentioned. It is currently being edited, and we will continue to add questions as they come in. And we will continue to reach out. If you reach out to us through the help desk, we'll continue to make sure that we give you the answers that you need. And then STAR Alternate 2 eligibility training. This is coming soon. We wanted to make sure that we captured questions as well, so that we can put it into that training that will then go into the learning management system on the student assessment website, so that you can have those trainings and then you can assign those to your teachers as well. And then another big hit has always been the STAR Alternate 2 before, during, and after assessment course that's provided by TextCam. This is kind of, we are making sure that that is being revised so that we can get that out, because there's valuable information in there as to help test administrators, to help campus administrators and teachers go through the process of the STAAR Alternate 2 assessment. So those are things that are coming. One of the things that we mentioned earlier was about educator committees and how we sent documents for revising participation requirements to those different educator committees. Texas Assessment has our own educator committees that we would like for you to consider applying to join. Here is a QR code that allows you to put your name in and say that you're interested in joining one of the educator committees. So please utilize this QR code. And then so that we can make sure to connect about those educator committees. And then our contact information. Please make sure that you're sending the STAAR Alternate 2 questions to the help desk. We also have the Q&A function here that we will also utilize. But any additional questions after this training, make sure that you're using the help desk. What I can say is that we will work collaboratively. The Student Assessment Division will work collaboratively with TEA Special Populations and any other division that we need to work with in helping you get the answer that you need. So continue to use that Student Assessment Help Desk. And just as you know, we put this on all of our slides that if you're going to change any of the content on the slides that were provided, to make sure to remove the TEA emblem or the footer for all those slides. Please feel free to use our slides as you are training your people. Like I mentioned earlier, we will be providing this to you guys. And finally, we do want to say thank you. I know I said it at the very beginning. We do want to say thank you. Thank you to the 436 participants and probably more that are watching together as a group. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for wanting to learn more. Thank you for all you do for Texas students and supporting teachers and LEAs across the state. Again, use the question and answer. It'll be open for a few more minutes as we work through and kind of close out. But this is the end of our presentation for today. Like I mentioned, those Q&As will be sent to us so that we can help respond to you.